So we are talking about the midterm and primarily the midterm, the way it has been done in the past, and we are going to be doing this, is every group would submit 5 questions based on Bloom's taxonomy of uh, the levels of difficulty of the text, or mental engagement, because they range from lower level thinking to higher forms of thinking, ranging from really comprehension and understanding to application to uh, appreciation, analysis, uh, synthesis, and eventually evaluation. So these are different, basically, levels of thinking. And every question could draw on a particular level. So a definition question would be like, for instance, how do the Japanese define intelligence? And of course, you could expand it by saying, how does that compare with the American definition of culture? As you know, these are essay type questions, and so they would require answers that would be in the form of discourse, extended discourse. And I would say there is no magic formula, but I would say probably from 1 paragraph to 4 or 5 multiple paragraphs, depending on the question. So a question that would be more, for instance, integrative or synthesizing question would be compare and contrast, for instance, language socialization practices among the Japanese preschool teachers, the Chinese and American preschool teachers. So here, obviously, you have to have a paragraph to introduce the topic and at least 3 or 4 paragraphs to do the comparison and the contrast. So in formulating those questions, what I'm trying to say is to make my job easier, at least before the midterm, until I submit the finalized midterm questions, would be that each group would be submitting 5 questions. And recognition could be given, should be given to all those who have contributed to the pool of the questions. Those who have been nominally a member of the group but have not really contributed should not be given any credit. But I'm not going to be there. It is basically your decision. In terms of basically how and what mechanism you follow, again, it really depends on you. For instance, you could ask every group member to submit 5 questions to the group coordinator. And then the group as a whole, or the coordinator of the group, would pick 5 questions, 5 of the best questions to submit. So 5 questions is basically what I would like to see. I will adopt some of those questions and put them on the midterm, and I may integrate elements from the questions that you submit to develop the finalized midterm questions. So if I'm not mistaken, it is October 6th, is it? That is the time for the submission of the group questions. And then by October 7, I will finalize the midterm questions and will post them to Dropbox. Again, you will have options. You will write about 5 or 6 of the topics, but you will have within 5 or 6 sets of questions, set 1, set 2, set 3, set 4, and 5. And within each set, you will have options, A, B, or C, or maybe A and B. And you will write only about one of those topics. Don't write about all of them. We do have general criteria how the midterm would be evaluated. That would be my framework, even though it is very subjective rather than purely analytical. But I'm looking for responses that show that you have been keeping up with the readings and that you don't really depend on general discussions or videos that you might have viewed, even though those could definitely be used as well, including the lecture notes, so on and so forth. In terms of adequacy of response, it really depends on the type of the question. It depends on your style of writing in particular. But I would say for extended responses or discourse, brevity is not always a virtue. But it doesn't mean that verbosity, would be highly valued or valued at all. A question could be answered, for instance, in one paragraph by someone who is well versed in academic, for instance, writing, but someone may write several paragraphs and yet not address the question. So what I suggest before you submit your midterm, you could do 3 levels of revision. Once, basically look at the content of your response, what the prompt is asking you, and if you have adequately, satisfactorily responded to the question. If you have provided examples, if you have, for instance, answered all the aspects of the question. A question may have 2 or 3 different aspects. Sometimes students may just answer one and forget about the other one. Perhaps there's an element of application that you may forget. So it is important that when you look at the content for revision, you also look at the prompt to make sure that you have addressed all aspects. After that, you could look at the organization of your text to see if it is well organized, if you have a title for it, if it is transparent, if there is a beginning, a middle, an ending, if you have used transitions within and across your text, words, paragraphs, the entirety of the text, meaning that you have created a coherent text. And after you're done with the organization, then you could look at elements of language and style, mechanics, punctuation, spelling, diction, grammatical, basically accuracy, sentence structures, variety, all these. If you put them together, it would be overwhelming. If you are doing any revision of an essay, a paper, or an essay exam, unless you break it down into these subcomponents, as I said, meaning 3 levels. You look at the content, you look at the organization, and then you look at the language. So if I'm not mistaken, I have October, does anyone remember? Is it October 18, 19? For the submission of the final?
Yeah, I believe it's October 18.
October 18, yes. So you will have sufficient time to review the material. How you're going to be reviewing, you have the presentations. You have the discussants questions. You have your own responses that you could draw on based on the type of questions that would appear on the midterm. Definitely you have the course material, and the midterm would cover up to the end of the Amish children. So all the articles and the reader that you have available on Beachboard, the textbooks, those would constitute basically your material. In terms of resources, beyond yourself, if you already are within a group, you could definitely continue to work with members of the group, but you are not going to be submitting group midterm responses. The responses should not be definitely identical, but I always welcome your negotiation, your consultations about the midterm. To make the midterm more manageable for your classmates and the questions, you could even indicate the page number. Now, it doesn't mean that the responses should really be limited to that particular segment in the text, but it would be helpful rather than going through the entirety of the book or a whole section. If you have, for instance, questions such as, let's say, how do you define an educated person? Rather than how do you define an educated person, that would give the writer the flexibility to define it how he or she would define it. He would say, how do Levinson and Brown, for instance, define the educated person? Of course, that is a definition. That definition may appear on page 50 and 54 and 56. So you would write those page numbers, or you would write basically the specific definition appears on this particular page. Now, definitely if you say, okay, what is the implication of this? Did this change your mind about how you define an educated person? Obviously, that would be a different type of question that, for instance, you could provide a different page number where the authors criticize the Western view that they have tried to essentialize, what an educated person is, irrespective of the fact that educated persons may be defined, and they are defined differently in different basically cultures. So there are situations that you could definitely provide those page numbers to guide yourself and also your classmates. Any questions about the midterm? I would assume that silence is consent, that you don't have any questions. Okay. So let me ask you about basically the revision. Do you find the revision helpful? Does it really make the course more manageable now?
Yeah, I think it helps out.
Okay, yeah, great. Again, I could not really abandon the project because it is, despite all the problems that we have, you have, and I'm aware of that, but the project could not be really taken out. We can't change horses midstream, as the saying, goes. Obviously, if it had been impossible, it has to be reimagined and reinvented, that aspect of the course. It has already seen significant changes. So I did take out a couple of assignments, including, for instance, the project presentation towards the end. That definitely would relieve the burden to a certain extent. And if, for instance, you are not in a position to be able to interview your potential participants, you don't have to do the interview. So that also has been taken out or will be taken out. Transcription practices. Now, obviously, I encourage transcription, especially if you have audio and video, and I'll go over this in the second, or rather third workshop, how to transcribe. Whether you do it for this course or not, it is important to learn about the virtues, and of course, it has its vices. It is really tedious, monotonous process initially of transcription. But that also has been taken out. So certain really elements from your ethnography have been removed to make it more manageable. So another good news that I have for you, after the midterm, you really have just one book left. That is Invisible Culture. And we do have just several, very few, not too many, articles basically left. So I think after the midterm, you would realize the bulk of basically the readings is gone, and you could sharpen basically your focus on your ethnography that I would be guiding you hopefully through this process successfully. So if you have basically fallen behind, don't lose hope. Do not despair. Do not panic. But I would say, I will try to do systematically the work. I will accept late submissions. I do not want to encourage late submissions. As I said, the beach board I have set up is not restrained or constrained by time. So sometimes, we have to reorient ourselves. We have to reorganize our minds, our time. I'm personally basically struggling with this myself. As I said initially, it is very difficult to keep up with basically the pace of things, even though everything is mostly online. Paradoxically, as I said, we are in need of more time, but we have less of it for everything, not just our classes, for our friends, for our family members, for our pets, for the world at large. And this is really painful. But I think what is important and should be the mission primarily during this social distancing is, not to forget the kind of empathy, not to lose it to these divinities, technological divinities, but to remain as humane as we can towards ourselves and towards the world. That's really what counts more than anything else. Definitely, I miss my students. I miss being in the actual classroom and face-to-face, basically, interaction. And unfortunately, we have lost something that we did not appreciate as much as we could have during the time that we had it. There is a saying, actually, in English, things lost find a new value. And as Che says, the most important thing is not to lose our passion for whatever it is, and to ignite it even more and more in the face of all these difficulties. It is really passion that keeps us afloat and alive, gives us a sense.
Yeah, it's not.
Yes.
Yeah, the text itself is not scary. It's nice to have such. They address it from so many sides, and then after a few of them, they start tying together as what the root concepts are. So I'm loving seeing that evolution in the text.
Right. Yeah. So I tried not to limit it to a certain level or a particular culture or a certain age. So yeah, you're right. It offers diversity, but probably it's not representative. Fortunately, we still live in a very diverse, basically, world. Hopefully, it is reflected in the course. It is reflected in the class. But I would say that that diversity now is really under, attack. Who thought that globalization would bring us to this point in terms of social distancing? Whether one belongs to a high context culture or a low context culture, the universe now has become very uniform in so many ways. So that diversity, definitely I appreciate it too. And, that gives us a sense of passion. At least it gives me to keep going.
Yes, sir. Well put.
So if there are no questions, I don't want to keep you. I will, this is being recorded. We'll make it accessible to those who could not make it. Feel free to email me if you have any questions or concerns. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. I have a quick question.
Sure. Stay if you have a question. I can stay on.
Okay. I was wondering if you received my email regarding my research question.
Could you tell me what your research question was, Jasmine? I did see something that you had posted, but I commented on it. But can you refresh my memory what your research question was?
Yeah, hold on one second. I'm just bringing it up right now. My research question was, in order for all students to successfully learn about women in literature, how does the professor implement different teaching methods that are effective? Through what ways are the students engaged during the Zoom class?
Okay, so that's a great question, but if you recall, I warned against using evaluative questions. If I were you, I would take out evaluative terms such as effective and successful. Definitely, you know, in the process, you could ask those questions when it comes to the students or the instructor, if basically Zoom is being used effectively, or what are the ways in which, you know, it could be improved. So if you take out, let's take out those evaluative terms and reread the question.
Okay. So I just took them out. So in order for all students to learn about women in literature, how does the professor implement different teaching methods? Through what ways are the students engaged during their Zoom class?
So would it be too broad a question to say how the students are socialized, for instance, into women's literature uh, uh, through Zoom? Or so to make the question shorter, how are the students, for instance, socialized into women's literature, you know, during this pandemic, whatever, or through Zoom?
Okay.
Is Zoom the only way that they are using, or are you focusing on Zoom only?
Yeah, that's the only way that instruction occurs.
But obviously there are textbooks, there are materials.
Oh yeah, of course. They like go into like breakout rooms and
Okay,
like hold this.
so, but your focus is on Zoom.
Yeah, because that's where the class takes
Yeah,
place.
yeah, definitely that could work.
So how are the students socialized into women in literature through their Zoom?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Mhm. Sure.
So in that way, I would just talk about like the different discussions they have.
Exactly. So here now you're looking for examples of
Okay.
what they do. For instance, what they do in a breakout room, for instance, what kind of text do they read? What kind of sessions? For instance, the sessions are what? Group discussions in breakout room, and then there is a main floor discussion. There are question answer sequences, open discussions. So you would identify the ways in which basically this is done.
Okay. Okay. That helps out a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I just want to clarify for the commentaries regarding the discussant, like,
Mm-hmm.
do we just respond to 3 discussant posts or 5?
Uh, if you recall, I combined notes 1 and 2 and um, discussion, right? So it is worth 100 points now. So if I'm not wrong, I've asked for 5. So you would have 5 discussion and 5 comments.
On top of the study guide questions that we did in the beginning of
No,
this?
no, that is a part of that.
Oh, okay. So if I answered all 5 study guide questions that you provided?
Yeah, and then 5 commentaries, yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I just had a question.
Mm-hmm.
For the study guides, I only see 4 up on the study guide section. Which
Okay.
one would be the 5th one?
The study guide questions, you know, those were the ones that I had posted because we didn't have discussants then. But discussants have taken over and they have been posting questions. So that's what it is. It doesn't mean that I have to post study guide questions for all the readings. I did it initially for the first 2 weeks.
Okay. And for the midterm, how many it's for each reading that we have to have a study guide, right? Before the midterm
Uh,
until the Amish?
Yes, until the end of Amish.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
So I was just wondering, so when the midterms posted, like where will it be posted? Like under Beachboard?
Dropbox.
Or I'm sorry, the questions I mean.
Dropbox, yeah.
Okay, so the questions like they'll be able like we'll click on the Dropbox for the midterm questions and they'll be under there and then we just put our answers on a Google Doc and submit it that way.
Right.
Okay, got it.
Another assignment, yeah.
Thank you, Professor. Have a good day.
You too.